I gave water to the tribe leader. Next day, he came to marry me to his two gorgeous daughters.
Before we dive into the story, don't forget to like the video and tell us in the comments where you're watching from.
Arizona Territory, late summer of 1882. Gray Ridge wasn't a real town so much as a collection of structures pretending to be one. A dozen buildings, a lopsided church, one saloon, and a courthouse that doubled as a jail and gathering hall. The wind rolled in off the flats and dragged fine yellow dust through the empty main road, under doors and across tired porches. Judge Bram Callister had lived on the edge of this town for 4 years. He didn't speak more than he had to, didn't drink, didn't gamble, and didn't tolerate noise. Not since the war. Not since losing his wife and boy to fever in a mining camp near Santa Fe. He'd buried them himself, came to Gray Ridge, and took up the job of judge when no one else wanted it. No one ever really came to him unless they had to. He was fine with that. He was inside the courthouse now, if you could call the squat adobe building with 2 holding cells and a dusty bench of courthouse. He sat behind a desk scarred with knife marks and dried ink, reading over a land dispute claim that had been filed 3 months too late. His coat was still buttoned, though it was warm, and he kept his holstered pistol nearby, resting in plain sight on the edge of the desk. The air inside smelled of dried leather and stale coffee, the kind of smell that clung to a man who didn't expect guests. Then he heard the voices outside, raised sharp, something about letting that redskin die. Another voice laughed. Bram paused, looked up from the paper, and let the words sink in. He recognized the tone. Not urgent, dismissive, cold. He stood slowly, his right knee stiff from a break that never healed right, and walked to the door. He stepped out onto the porch with slow, deliberate movement. That's when he saw her. The woman was crouched beside the old stone well, one arm holding onto the rim for balance. She had no shoes, and the skin of her calves and ankles was scraped raw in places from walking the hard dirt. Her dress had once been cream-colored, but now it was the same brown as the road, torn at the shoulder and at the chest where the fabric had split, exposing the full slope of her bust, damp with sweat and clinging to her curves in the sun. Her face was flushed, her wavy chestnut hair half stuck to her forehead. She was holding a dented tin cup to the mouth of a collapsed man, Apache by the look of him, mid-60s maybe, deeply weathered skin, shoulder wrapped in a crude bandage stained through with blood and sand. The townsfolk were standing back, 6 of them at least, arms crossed, sneering, not lifting a finger. Bram took in the scene without blinking. The woman wasn't speaking. She was focused, steady. Her hand gently tilted the cup to the man's cracked lips. He was barely responsive, eyes half shut, muttering something too soft to hear. Bram walked toward them. The townsfolk backed a little, not out of fear but discomfort. They didn't like him much. That suited him fine. "You from town?" he asked the woman when he got close enough. She looked up quickly. Her expression wasn't fearful, just wary, guarded, like someone who'd had to defend herself with silence more than words. "No," she said. Her voice was dry, cracked, but controlled. "I passed through 2 days ago. Slept in the hay shed behind the church." Bram studied her for another beat. Her cheeks were hollowed slightly. She hadn't eaten well. Her dress was barely holding together. Yet she kept offering water like she wasn't the one in need. He squatted beside the old Apache man. The man's breath was shallow, the skin around the bandage hot to the touch. Fever, dehydration, bad wound. His tunic had beadwork on the collar, a warrior's mark. This man had standing in his tribe. Bram had seen those kinds before during patrols in the territory, quiet, older men who didn't speak unless they had something that mattered. He said something, the woman offered. I couldn't make it out. Might have been son or daughter. Her eyes didn't leave the man's face. "You got a name?" Bram asked her. She hesitated, then said, He nodded once. "Judge Bram Callister." He didn't offer his hand. "I know who you are," she said quietly. "You touch him, only to move him into shade, and give water. Then you've already done more than most here ever will." Bram turned to the townsfolk. "Go on," he said flatly. "Ain't your business anymore." They didn't argue. They just muttered and walked away in 2s and 3s, kicking dust as they went. "You can't stay here," Bram said after a moment, more to himself than her. "But I'm not letting him die out in the road like a stray dog." He looked at her. "Can you walk?" "Yes." He knelt, slid one arm under the Apache's back, and braced his legs. Isla grabbed the man's other arm and helped lift. He weighed next to nothing. They carried him up the courthouse steps and through the door. Bram cleared the case papers off a bench, laid a folded wool blanket over it, and helped ease the old man down. Isla stayed by the wounded man, soaking a cloth in the bucket at the back of the room and gently cleaning the wound. She moved with the same kind of care Bram remembered from his wife, measured, patient, exact. "You a nurse?" he asked, watching her. "No," she said. "I worked with a woman who did field tending during the war. She took me in when I had nowhere else to go. Learned what I could. She didn't volunteer more than that." Bram poured a mug of water and handed it to her. She drank it slow, cautious not to gulp. He watched her throat move, the way her chest rose and fell with shallow breaths. Her skin had burned a little from the sun, freckles standing out brighter now. He leaned against the doorframe, eyes on the man. "His kin might come." "I figured. You're not afraid of that." Isla glanced at him, not flinching. "I was more afraid of doing nothing." He respected that answer. They didn't speak for a long time. The courthouse dimmed as the sun sank lower. Bram lit the lamp. Outside, the town slipped into quiet. Isla stayed beside the Apache, her hands folded in her lap now, waiting. Bram stood across the room, arms folded. Neither one of them moved to leave. By morning, the air outside the courthouse was dry and still, the sun already climbing hard over the ridge, warming the adobe walls until they glowed pale gold. Inside, the smell of sleep and old sweat clung to the corners. The Apache elder had made it through the night. His breathing had steadied some. The fever hadn't broken, but he wasn't worse. That counted. Isla hadn't left his side. She'd sat upright on the floor against the far wall, legs folded beneath her, head tilted down but never fully asleep. Her eyes were red around the edges. Her hair hung loose and tangled around her face. Her dress, still torn at the neckline, clung to her chest in places where sweat had dried, and the hem remained frayed just above her knees. Yet she held herself with quiet dignity. She didn't ask for food or rest. She hadn't spoken since the night before. Bram Callister had slept sitting up in the desk chair with his boots still on and his coat across his lap. He stirred first, blinked against the early light seeping through the shutter slats. His neck ached. His jaw felt locked. But his eyes went immediately to the old man, and then to Isla. "He's still breathing," she said without turning. Her voice was low, rough. Bram stood crossed to check. The elder's chest rose and fell slowly. His face was flushed with fever, but his mouth wasn't cracked anymore. Bram grunted once and went to pour fresh water. "You slept?" he asked her. "A little. You eat anything?" She shook her head. "I'll get something from the depot," he said. She looked up, blinking against the light. He said something again, just before dawn. Same words. "Son and daughter?" She nodded. But there was more this time. He said, "Life for life. We're close to it." I think that's what he meant. Bram stared at the man for a long moment, then turned, opened the courthouse door, and stepped into the morning. Gray Ridge was waking up. 2 wagons rattled down the road toward the supply depot. A boy chased a stray chicken into the alley beside the saloon. Someone hammered something behind the livery barn. Bram didn't wave or greet anyone. He didn't explain where he was headed. 15 minutes later, he came back with a burlap sack holding dried apples, hard bread, and a wrapped portion of smoked beef. Isla ate quietly, slowly. Bram poured water for both of them. The silence lasted until the sun reached the courthouse windows. And then came the horses. They heard them before they saw them. 3, maybe 4 riders. Hooves slow, deliberate, kicking up dust. Bram stepped out onto the porch. Isla stood and followed, staying close to the doorway. 4 riders had stopped at the well. One dismounted, a younger man, tall and lean, long braid wrapped with leather bands, a knife at his hip. The other 3 stayed on horseback. One of them was a woman with a narrow, angular face, black hair braided tight and decorated with bone and bead. The other was younger, rounder face, brighter eyes, her hair loose but pulled behind her ears. She was the one holding the reins of the lead horse. And on that horse sat the Apache elder, propped upright, wrapped in a fresh blanket, swaying gently but clearly awake. His eyes opened as Bram stepped into full view. The rider leading him forward brought the horse closer to the courthouse steps and stopped, then dismounted. She didn't speak at first, just looked at Bram calmly. The elder lifted his chin. His voice was cracked but firm. "She gave me water," he said, accent thick but words clear. "You protected her." He looked down at Isla, then back to Bram. "You are her man," he said. Bram didn't speak. The silence stretched. The older of the two daughters stepped forward and spoke in careful English. "I am Sana. This is my sister, Leia. You gave life to our father. That life must be honored. In our way." She didn't look away. "You take us. We are yours." Behind them, the other Apache men said nothing. No one moved. Bram felt Isla shift slightly behind him, her breath held. He looked at Sana directly. "I didn't do anything except give him shelter." That was her. The elder nodded. "But she is yours. You kept her safe. That makes it you." Bram's jaw worked. He hadn't spoken so many words in a day in months. Now all eyes were on him. "I don't take wives for payment," he said slowly. "Not for honor. Not for anything." Sana didn't flinch. "This is not payment. This is survival. We offer freely. And if I say no," the younger one, Leia, stepped forward. Her tone was lighter, almost curious. "Then we return. But it will be shame to offer life and have it rejected." Bram stepped back slightly, motioning toward the door. "Bring your father inside. He's not ready to ride." The Apache men looked at each other, then nodded. The daughters helped lift the elder and carried him in with surprising strength and ease. Bram moved a second bench near the first, gave him a blanket, poured more water. Sana remained standing. Leia wandered the edge of the room, eyes running along the shelves of books and stacked papers. Isla remained silent by the stove, watching everything. Later, when the elders slept again, Bram sat on the porch with Isla. "She gave you to me," he said quietly. Isla nodded once. "I know. You all right with that?" Her voice was soft. "You didn't claim me. You just didn't deny it either." He looked at her. Could have said something. I didn't want to embarrass him. He looked away. "This place isn't safe for Apache girls. Or for women like you. I know that too." They sat in silence again. From inside came the sound of Leia asking a question about a book. Sana's voice was lower, sharper, telling her to stay quiet. "They'll stay a day or two," Bram said, "until he's stronger." Isla didn't answer, but she didn't leave either. Neither did he. The morning after the elder was carried into the courthouse, Gray Ridge felt different. Nothing in town had changed. The wind still swept through the dirt roads, and the same drunk from the saloons still passed out behind the smithy. But something about the courthouse felt heavier, fuller. 3 women now shared its space. None of them spoke much. None of them asked for anything. Yet their presence rearranged everything. Judge Bram Callister woke early, as always. He didn't like sleeping past first light. Not since the war, and especially not with strangers under his roof. Even if they weren't exactly strangers anymore. He shaved at the basin, re-threaded the chain on his pocket watch, and tightened the collar of his worn shirt. When he came out from the back room, he found Isla already sweeping the floor with a stiff broom. She didn't stop when she saw him. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "I didn't mind," she replied, voice low, steady. Felt like something that needed doing. Her dress was still torn. The neckline had been pinned as best she could with 2 small pieces of wire, but still exposed the top of her chest where her freckles stood out like pale dust. She hadn't found shoes yet, and her feet were red from the cold of the stone floor. Still, her posture was calm, like she'd always belonged there. Bram noticed her movements, controlled, silent. Not hurried. She didn't act like someone grateful to be taken in. She acted like someone who had finally found stillness. He poured water into the kettle and set it over the fire. In the next room, Sana sat on the floor beside her father, dabbing his forehead with a damp cloth. She barely glanced up when Bram entered. Her long braid lay over one shoulder, the leather ties and bone beads in it catching light from the window. Her expression was unreadable, but her eyes followed him, measuring, not unkind, but not naive either. "He's stronger," she said. Bram nodded. "He slept through the night. Because he knows he's safe here. That's not something I promised. You didn't need to." Leia sat cross-legged near the shelf of court ledgers, flipping through pages she couldn't read, but seemed to study anyway. She was barefoot too, her tribal dress shorter than her sister's, tied at the waist with a sash of beaded cloth. She looked up at Bram and grinned faintly. "What is this?" she asked, lifting a bound volume. "Land registry," he answered. "Does it tell who owns what?" "Sometimes. Depends who's honest." She nodded as if she understood more than she let on. That afternoon, Bram held court. A cattleman accused his neighbor of stealing fence wood. The hearing was short, pointless. The courthouse only had 3 benches, and all were filled, some out of interest in the case, most just to get a glimpse at the women now residing under the judge's roof. Isla sat behind the desk where she'd begun stacking papers earlier. Her hands moved slow and exact, sorting claim slips and land filings into rows across the edge. She didn't look up once. Her torn dress hung open slightly at the shoulder, revealing more than most would allow, but she never adjusted it. She wasn't ashamed. Bram watched the faces of the men seated in the courtroom. Their eyes kept drifting from him to her, their expressions less than polite. He cleared his throat hard during the testimony, just enough to break their attention. When the hearing ended, he ordered the benches cleared. Only one man lingered, Tom Ackerley, the feed store clerk, younger and slicker than most. He leaned near Isla, offering a smile. "If you need fabric for a proper dress, miss, I could." "She doesn't," Bram said without turning. The man blinked. "I only meant—" "I heard what you meant." Isla looked up briefly. Her face gave nothing away, but Bram caught the flicker in her eyes. Not fear, disappointment. Like she'd expected no better from the town. Tom tipped his hat and left. Bram remained standing until the door shut behind him. Later, as the sun bled lower behind the ridge, Isla returned to her seat by the desk. Sana was still with her father. Leia had wandered down toward the retired doctor's shop to ask about herbs. Bram was alone with Isla for the first time all day. He sat across from her, hands folded on the desk, elbows resting on a stack of unfiled warrants. "You don't owe me," she said before he could speak. "I know. I didn't ask to stay." "You didn't. I've had people assume before," she added. "Men like Ackerley think any woman alone is waiting for someone to rescue her or claim her." He nodded once. "You didn't ask to be claimed, either." "I didn't," she said. He didn't answer right away. The lamp flickered between them, casting hard lines across her cheeks, catching the shine in her eyes. "You stayed," he finally said. "That's what I noticed. I've been running a long time. Staying was harder." "Why here?" She paused. "Because you didn't ask anything of me." They sat in silence after that. The courthouse settled again into its creaks and sighs. Outside, someone called out across the alley for supper. Inside, no one moved. At dusk, Sana appeared in the doorway, arms folded. "My sister wants to remain," she said, without introduction. "She thinks she can learn something from the old doctor. Medicine maybe." Bram looked at her. "And you?" "I'll leave when our father can travel." He nodded. "I see how you look at her," Sana said after a moment. The quiet one. Bram didn't respond. "She gave water when no one else did. That means more to us than it does to you, I think." "She's not mine," he said evenly. "She should be." Then Sana left the room. Bram sat there for a long time after that, the silence gathering around him again. Isla didn't speak, but she didn't move away from the desk, and he didn't leave her side. The wind picked up again that morning, dragging grit across the wooden porch of the courthouse and rattling the shutter hinges. It was the kind of wind that felt like a warning, though no one ever said it aloud. Grey Ridge was full of silences like that. Unsaid things, quiet judgments, glances that lingered longer than they should. Judge Bram Callister had learned to read those silences long ago. He felt them now, heavier than ever. Inside the courthouse, Isla folded blankets at the edge of the bench where the elder Apache lay resting. His breathing was steadier. The swelling in his shoulder had gone down, though he still couldn't walk without help. Sana stayed nearby, quietly tending to him without fuss. Her movements were practiced. Bram began to suspect she'd been the one caring for their father long before they came to Grey Ridge. Leia had taken to disappearing during the day. At first, Bram had allowed it without question. But now he watched her go, slipping out each morning just after breakfast with a satchel over her shoulder, her bare feet kicking up dust as she walked toward the back road leading to the retired doctor's cabin. She'd come back by sundown, cheeks flushed, her arms full of leaves and dried roots, her fingers sometimes stained with dye or blood. She never explained what she was learning. She didn't have to. It was obvious she wasn't wasting time. That morning, after she left, Bram stepped out back to Splitwood. He needed the rhythm. Needed something that didn't involve watching Isla move quietly through the courthouse, barefoot and tired, folding linens and res-tacking law books without being asked. Her dress was still torn at the neckline, the safety pin still holding the left side together where the fabric gaped. When she reached for higher shelves or leaned forward to pick up fallen papers, her curves showed plainly, but never intentionally. She never looked around to see who was watching. She just worked. He tried not to watch her. Failed most days. By midday, Isla brought out a chipped tin bowl of beans and set it in front of him without a word. She sat down across the porch, arms resting on her knees. The sun lit her hair in patches, and a breeze pulled at the hem of her dress. She stared off at the horizon, not blinking. Bram set the spoon down halfway through eating. "You been running from something?" he asked. Her eyes moved to his, calm but firm. "Yes." "You still running?" "No," she said. They sat there a while longer. "I was a schoolteacher once," she added suddenly. "Back in Kansas. Widow of a man I didn't love, daughter of a man who drank himself into debt. I left when the debts came looking for me." Bram didn't interrupt. "I made it west with a church group. They dropped me in Bisbee. After that, I walked. Town to town. Nothing stuck. Why Grey Ridge?" She gave a small shrug. "I was tired." He nodded once. "That's honest." "You?" she asked. Bram shifted, leaning against the porch post. "Served during the war. Lost my wife and boy to fever 3 years after. Came here because it was quiet and didn't ask for anything." She studied him for a moment. "And now it's asking?" "No, but it's watching," he said. He didn't say it, but they both knew what he meant. The town had noticed the courthouse wasn't empty anymore, that Isla stayed past dark, that 2 Apache women were inside, one of them tending a war leader. Men talked. Wives whispered. The pastor hadn't come by, and neither had the sheriff. Late afternoon, someone knocked on the courthouse door. Bram opened it to find Reverend Tillman standing with a Bible tucked under his arm and a faint smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Just checking in," Tillman said. "Didn't know you made rounds," Bram replied. "Only when the flock asks me to." His eyes drifted past Bram into the room. "A lot of movement in and out of your office lately. Folks want me sure all's proper." Bram didn't move. "It's a courthouse, Reverend, not a church. You still hold influence, Judge, especially with that woman staying under your roof. She has a name. Do the girls inside, the ones from the tribe, also names?" The Reverend's smile tightened. "I only meant, I know what you meant." Bram closed the door. That evening, he found Isla sitting at his desk, not behind it, but beside it, on the edge of the chair where she'd been filing papers earlier. Her bare feet were tucked beneath her. She had a cup of weak tea in her hands, and her eyes were on the dying fire in the stove. He crossed the room slowly, boots quiet on the floorboards. She didn't move when he sat beside her. Their shoulders brushed barely. She didn't pull away. He didn't speak. She tilted her head slightly and asked, "Do you want me to leave?" "No," he said without thinking. "You're sure?" "Yes." She looked down at her cup. "Then tell me to stay. Not just because it's quiet here. Not because I'm useful." He turned his head toward her. The flickering lamp cast faint lines across her face, her high cheekbones, her jaw, the faint pink along her chest where the neckline dipped. "Stay," he said, quiet but clear. Her eyes didn't lift, but her breathing slowed. Her hand, still holding the tea, shifted, just enough that her fingers touched his leg. Neither of them moved after that. The courthouse held its breath. From the other room came the faint sound of Sana helping her father into a sitting position. Leia's voice followed, excited, explaining something about bark poultices and wound herbs. But in that room, beside that desk, everything stood still. Not claimed, not owed, just stayed. By the next morning, word had spread further than Bram expected. It started at the mercantile, two ranch wives whispering by the sugar barrels. Then the saloon regulars joined in, half drunk by noon, loud enough that even the general store clerk heard. By dusk, the story was halfway twisted. Judge Callister had taken in not one, but three women, one of them Apache, and was keeping them all under one roof, unwed, unchurched, and unnatural. Inside the courthouse, none of them spoke about it, but all of them felt it. Bram spent most of the morning reviewing property complaints, his pencil moving slow across the paper, though his eyes drifted too often toward the back room. Isla had risen early to prepare tea for the elder Apache, now propped up with new strength. Sana helped him sit against the wall, feeding him small bites of bread soaked in broth. Leia returned late, as usual, her hands stained with crushed juniper and the pale dust of dried roots. She smelled of sun and pine and kept smiling like the whispers hadn't touched her at all. But they had touched Isla. That much Bram could tell. She moved a little more carefully now, as if aware of eyes that might not be there. Her torn dress remained pinned but sagged lower at the neckline. She made no effort to change it, yet her shoulders were tighter, her chin lifted too deliberately. She hadn't spoken much since the night before, since she'd touched his leg and asked him to say it plain. He had. He told her to stay, and she had. But the town had begun circling. That afternoon, the sheriff came. Bram saw him ride up from the window, slim frame, dark hat, spurs too polished. Sheriff Kincaid hadn't been a problem before. They shared the law in name only. Bram handled disputes and land. Kincaid handled drunks and noise. But now he stepped onto the courthouse porch like a man arriving with purpose. "You got a minute, Judge?" Kincaid asked through the door. Bram opened it without stepping aside. "Make it quick." Kincaid glanced past him. "Heard some things. Then you're wasting time. Folks are talking. They always talk. This is different. You got Apache women sleeping here. A schoolteacher without a ring. You ain't exactly guarding appearances." Bram crossed his arms. "You came here to lecture me about morality? I came here because people are askin what kind of court you're running. Someone to ask if your judgment's been compromised." Bram held the door with one hand. "You tell those people this court's still law. If they got a charge to bring, they're welcome to file it. Otherwise, get off my porch." Kincaid hesitated. "You're making it harder for yourself. Then leave." The sheriff met his stare, then nodded and turned away. When Bram shut the door, he stood still for a moment. The room behind him was quiet. Then he heard Isla's voice, steady, close. "They'll keep coming." He turned. She stood by the stove, hands wrapped around a chipped cup of hot water. Her eyes were calm, but tired. "I know," Bram said. "You don't have to defend me." "I'm not." She raised an eyebrow slightly. "I'm defending this roof," he added, "and everyone under it." That night, they didn't sit beside each other at the desk. Too much tension hung in the air. Isla finished filing ledgers in silence. Leia sorted herb bundles near the fire. The elder slept, and Sana sat near the door, arms crossed, watching them all. Later, as Isla wiped the table clean, Sana stood and spoke for the first time directly to her. "You stayed too long," Sana said, not unkindly. Isla looked up. "Town won't forgive it." "I didn't ask it to," Isla said. "You care for the judge?" Isla hesitated. "Yes." Sana nodded. "Then stay close. Not for him. For yourself. This town, it's not like where you're from. They'd rather watch a woman burn than see her rise." Isla's throat tightened, but she nodded. "I know that already." There was no sentiment in Sana's face, only understanding. Later that evening, after the others had gone quiet, Bram walked to the edge of the porch, arms folded, coat pulled tight despite the heat still rising off the ground. Isla joined him, barefoot as always, her toes curling on the wooden planks. He didn't look at her. "You all right?" She nodded. "I've lived through worse." "You shouldn't have to." "I did anyway." They stood in silence for a long while. Then, without looking, she touched his hand. Not much, just placed her fingers on the side of his knuckles. He didn't move away. From inside came the soft clink of Sana's beadwork as she shifted in her sleep. From town came nothing but wind. And together they stood there, quiet, unmoving, not claiming, not explaining, just staying. By midweek, the town stopped whispering and started talking louder. Judge Callister had let it simmer. Days of half-heard remarks at the feed store, longer stares at Isla when she walked alone to fetch water, deliberate gaps left at church when her name came up. But on Thursday morning, something shifted. He stepped out of the courthouse just after sunrise. The sky was still orange, the town not yet fully awake. Isla had left earlier to bring the elder some clean cloths from the doctor's shop. Leia had gone with her. Sana remained inside, keeping watch as always. But this time, when Bram looked down the road, he saw them gathered. 7 men, 2 wives trailing behind, all locals, ranchers, shopkeepers, and the undertaker's brother, who rarely spoke but now stood near the front like he'd come to see something settled. Sheriff Kincaid waited near the back, arms crossed, eyes scanning everyone but not stopping anything. Bram stepped off the porch slowly, coat unbuttoned, holster loose. No one greeted him. The first to speak was Ephraim Jensen, mid-50s, salt-bearded, always in town long enough to stir trouble, but never stay and see it fixed. "This ain't about your right to live quiet, Judge," Ephraim said. "This is about who you're letting inside our town." "They haven't broken a law," Bram answered plainly. "They don't need to. They don't belong. Apache don't belong. And that woman, she's half-naked, unwed, and sleeping under your roof." Bram's jaw tightened. "She's not a problem. She's a distraction," Ephraim snapped. "She's making people talk. Weakens your seat." Someone behind him muttered agreement. "She helped save a man's life," Bram said, "when no one else did." "That ain't the point." "No," Bram said. "It is." He stepped closer, slow, each boot dragging dust. "You all walked past the well and saw an old man dying, and none of you moved. She did. She brought him water, brought him shelter. You call her a whore for it. I call her the only decent soul I've seen in this place in weeks." A pause. Bram glanced past the men, toward the edge of town. Isla stood there, returning from her errand. Her hands clutched a folded cloth, her dress still torn, shoulders burned from the sun, strands of chestnut hair stuck to her cheeks. She stopped when she saw the crowd, reading the situation instantly. But she didn't turn around. She walked forward. Every step was slow, measured. She didn't speak, didn't look at anyone but Bram. When she reached the edge of the group, a man in the back stepped into her path. Tom Ackerley, the same clerk who had tried to help her days ago. "You should be ashamed," he muttered, loud enough to be heard. Isla didn't reply. He looked at the crowd. "Is this what we're letting stand? Apache lovers and whores sitting on the judge's porch like they own it." That was when Bram moved. He didn't raise his voice, didn't reach for the gun, just stepped up beside Isla and stared at Ackerley until the man flinched and took one step back. "She's not leaving," Bram said, "and you're not speaking to her again." A stillness followed. Bram turned to the rest. "You all want a hearing? File a case. But if you think you're going to intimidate the law because it doesn't look the way you want, then you've got the wrong damn town." And with that, he turned his back to them. Isla followed without a word. Inside, Sana stood from the bench, eyes locked on them both. She had heard every word. She didn't speak, but her gaze had changed, less guarded, more certain. Bram sat at the edge of the desk, breathing hard. Isla set the cloth down gently and stood across from him. "You didn't need to do that," she said, voice quiet. "I did. They'll hate you for it. They already do." Silence again, but heavier now, more intimate. Isla took a step forward. "You said I could stay. I meant it." Her eyes dropped to his hand resting on the desk, tensed, open. She reached out, slowly, and placed her hand over his. It wasn't a gesture of comfort. It was steady, firm. He looked at her, jaw still tight. She leaned in. No hesitation, no pause. Their lips met, soft, warm, unsure for a second. Then real, earned. It wasn't a claim. It wasn't desperation. It was staying. When she pulled back, her eyes were wet but steady. "Then I'm not going anywhere." Outside, the wind kicked dust along the street again. But no one stood out front anymore. No one dared. Inside the courthouse, something had settled. Not finished. but rooted. The courthouse never had a proper second room for sleeping. There was a cot in the back behind a curtained partition where Bram used to rest between long hearings or stormy nights, but hadn't been used in years. Still, after the kiss, Isla didn't go back to sleep near the stove or against the wall like before. She stayed close. That night, after the door was locked and the lamp turned down low, Bram unrolled the cot and handed her a folded wool blanket. She didn't speak, just accepted it, laid it down, and sat on the edge as he returned to the bench by the fire. But neither of them slept. The silence was comfortable now, full of something unspoken but understood. By morning, nothing had changed, and everything had. Bram came out with his shirt half-buttoned, rubbing his eyes. Isla had already started boiling water. The elder Apache lay resting, stronger than he'd been in days. Sana sat cross-legged beside him, sharpening a flint knife with calm purpose. Leia returned from the doctor's that afternoon with a satchel of dried herbs and 2 small bottles of tincture. A child with a cough had been waiting on her in front of the saloon. A bruised older woman stood behind him, arms folded, nodding slowly. Leia knelt and examined the boy, listening to his chest, pressing gently against his ribs. She said little, but gave the woman a bundle of dried willow bark and instructions. "Boil half," she said, pointing. "Drink warm. No sugar." By the time Leia returned to the courthouse, there were whispers of how she had healing hands and quiet ways. Gray Ridge, always suspicious, had begun to make room for usefulness. At supper, they ate together, not as judge and strangers, but as something closer to family. Bram cut the bread, while Isla poured broth into cups. Sana served their father, and Leia hummed under her breath while slicing root vegetables she'd collected herself. "I'll stay until winter," Sana said suddenly. Everyone looked at her. She didn't elaborate, just looked at Bram. "After that, our father will return home. Alone. You won't go with him?" Isla asked. Sana shook her head. "He understands. I've seen what I needed." Bram understood too. The way she looked at him had changed since the day he defended Isla. It wasn't affection now. It was respect. That night, Isla lingered at the desk long after the others had gone quiet. Bram sat beside her. Their hands brushed again, and she didn't pull away. He reached over slowly, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. "You're still here," he said. "I said I would be." He didn't speak again, just leaned forward. This time when they kissed, it was slower, deeper, the kind that wasn't just for comfort but belonging. Isla stood, held his hand, and without words, led him to the cot. It was narrow, built for one, but she made room. They didn't undress fully, just enough to breathe. His shirt came loose. Her torn dress slipped at the shoulder. Their bodies moved gently, silently. No urgency, no fear, just presence. When it was over, she rested against his chest, breathing calm. "You don't have to explain it to anyone," he whispered. "I wasn't going to," she replied. He wrapped his arm around her waist. They didn't speak again that night. Outside, the courthouse stood quiet under the moon. Inside, the warmth lingered, earned not by promises but by staying. The first frost came before the town was ready. It slipped in during the night, silent and thin, laying a silver sheen over rooftops and window panes. The dust roads stiffened underfoot. Chickens pecked closer to the ground. Smoke rose early from every chimney in Gray Ridge, including the one above the courthouse. Inside, Bram stood at the back wall, sleeves rolled, hammer in hand. He was framing a second partition, wood cut from the pile out back, salvaged and rough-edged. He measured slow, steady, one nail at a time. Behind him, Isla was washing linens in the metal basin. Her new dress, simple cotton, still low-cut but mended at the shoulders and hem, clung damp against her hips as she worked. Her hands were raw from the cold water, but she didn't complain. "You don't have to do this," she said, glancing over. "I know," Bram replied, driving another nail. "You're building a wall. I'm building a room." Her eyes met his. "For who?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached down, picked up a plank, and measured it against the floor. "Thought it was time you had a door to close. If you wanted one." She didn't say anything, but her mouth softened just slightly. That morning, The elder Apache rose from his blankets without help. Sana helped him into a wrapped coat, stitched from 2 hides and patched at the elbows. He sat by the fire for nearly an hour, sipping tea while watching the others move through the room. His gaze lingered on Isla longer than before. He nodded once, slow and final. Then he stood. Sana brought him his walking staff and a satchel of herbs and dried meat. Outside, 2 tribesmen waited on horseback, wrapped in furs, quiet and still. "I will go now," the elder said. His English was sparse but clear. "My daughters choose." "I accept." Bram stepped forward. "He can stay longer if he needs to." The elder shook his head. "He does not. He has seen." He turned to Sana, placing a hand on her shoulder. Then to Leia, who stood near the stove, her braid tied back in a new red ribbon Isla had given her 2 nights earlier. "You have your own path," he said. "Do not wait for mine." Leia hugged him tightly. Sana didn't cry, but her breath caught when he touched her cheek. Outside, the wind was cold. Bram and Isla watched the riders disappear down the far ridge without speaking. Later that afternoon, Sana packed her things. She didn't own much. A few pieces of beadwork, a pair of worn boots, and a knife she'd sharpened twice a day since she arrived. Leia stood beside her, arms folded. "You don't have to leave." Sana shook her head. "I stayed as long as I needed. It's time." "Where will you go?" Sana looked toward the hills. "North. There's a trader's camp outside Holbrook. I can move through there. I'll find my way." Isla stepped in quietly, holding a bundle wrapped in cloth, dried meat, fresh bread, and a strip of leather with beadwork tied in the center. "For the road," she said. Sana took it without a word. For a long moment, the 2 women looked at each other, neither smiling, neither blinking. Then Sana said, "You kept your head high, even when they wanted to drag it down. That matters." Isla nodded. "You showed me how." That evening, after Sana left, the house was quieter, but not emptier. Leia moved with more ease now. She sat beside Isla at the desk in the evenings, helping record names and dates from case files. She began stitching poultices in the corner, and even the sheriff had stopped by earlier that day to ask if she had anything for a toothache. He hadn't looked Bram in the eye, but he had knocked. The townsfolk were still cold, but they were no longer circling. At sundown, Bram finished the final beam on the small back room. The door wasn't much, 2 hinges and a latch, but it closed. He stood back, arms folded, watching Isla as she stepped through and looked inside. "Yours," he said. She turned slowly. "You gave me a room." He stepped closer. "I gave you a place. Been thinking maybe you could stay, if that's something you'd want longer term." Her eyes flicked over his face. "Like a housekeeper?" "No." She waited. He fumbled in his pocket, pulled out a small square wrapped in cloth. Inside was a ring, not polished, not store-bought. Just a band he'd filed himself from silver coin, the edge smooth but uneven. "I ain't good with speeches," he said. "I don't know what church you were raised in. But if staying with me, if that's what you still want, then I'd like it to be as more than just company." She looked at the ring, then at him. "I've already said yes," she whispered. He smiled barely, but it was real. She took the ring and slid it on, then pulled him down by the collar of his shirt and kissed him again, slower, deeper than before. They stood there in the doorway of the room he'd built, him with sawdust still on his sleeves, her barefoot with raw fingers and a mended dress, knowing what came next wouldn't be perfect, but it would be theirs. The first snow came early in Grey Ridge that year. Thin at first, just a dusting, but enough to turn the dirt roads white and hush the usual sounds of the town. Even the saloon doors stopped swinging. Horses stood quiet under thin tarps. Footsteps softened. For once, the town felt peaceful. Inside the courthouse, the stove burned steady. The walls no longer echoed. Blankets were folded neatly on hooks. Fresh herbs hung, drying from rafters. The back room now had a door, a proper bed, and 2 cups always left on the windowsill. Nothing in it was fancy, but it was full of warmth. Isla stood near the stove, stirring a pot with one hand, her other resting over her belly, almost without thinking. It wasn't obvious yet, not to most, but Bram knew. She had told him a week ago, in a voice quiet enough he almost didn't hear. He hadn't said much, just nodded once, pulled her close, and didn't let go for a long time. Now he sat across the room at the desk, sorting case slips with Leia. She wore a wool shawl over her shoulders and worked with a calm focus, her ink-stained fingers dancing over each page. She still visited the old doctor every week, now with townsfolk of her own, mothers with children, ranchers with twisted knees. They called her Miss Leia now. No one called her Apache anymore. Not out loud. The door opened around midday. Sheriff Kincaid stepped in, hat in hand. He wasn't tense, just cold. "Judge," he greeted, then nodded at Isla. "Ma'am." Bram stood. "What is it?" Kincaid rubbed the brim of his hat. "Pastor's got the forms. Says you and Miss Isla ain't made it legal yet. We're not asking him. Didn't think you were. But he's saying folks will talk." Bram didn't flinch. "Let them." Kincaid hesitated, then reached into his coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "But if you want it quiet, I can do it." Isla looked up. Her hand paused over the pot. Bram stepped forward. "Today." Kincaid nodded. "No bells. No sermon. Just names and ink." Leia looked at Isla. Isla didn't smile. She just turned to Bram. "If we're already staying," she said, "we may as well sign the door." An hour later, the courthouse door closed with a solid click, and Bram stood beside Isla at the desk. Kincaid unfolded the paper, dipped the pen, and cleared his throat. "Do you, Judge Callister, take this woman?" "I do," Bram said. Isla turned toward him, her hair brushed neatly for once. Her torn dress, replaced with a plain blue one Leia had mended by hand. She nodded once. "I do." Kincaid signed the bottom, slid the pen across. Bram scrawled his name. Isla followed. And that was it. No crowd. No music. No blessing. Just done. After the sheriff left, Isla sat beside the stove again, lifting the pot off the flame. "You want soup, husband?" Bram smirked. "I'll take that over a sermon." Leia clapped her hands once and went to find the plates. The rest of the evening passed in steady routine. Nothing flashy, just comfort. They ate together, washed the dishes, folded fresh linens. Bram sat in the doorway of the back room, his legs stretched out, watching Isla move around the kitchen. At one point, she passed behind him, and her hand touched his shoulder. Not by accident, not for attention, just as habit. Outside, the wind picked up again, brushing against the shutters. Somewhere down the road, a bell rang. Someone's livestock was out. A baby cried, and then quiet again. As the fire dimmed, Isla settled into bed. Bram followed, locking the door behind him. She turned to face him, hands over her belly. "You still all right with this?" she asked. "With me?" He reached for her hand, fingers calloused but warm. "I wouldn't change a thing." Her voice dropped. "Not even the past." He shook his head. "Especially not the past. It brought you here." They laid there together, her body curled into his, the snow outside falling heavier now. The town would always whisper. But inside that courthouse turned home, where justice and kindness lived side by side, where Apache daughters found purpose and a once widowed woman now grew life beneath her ribs, the world had become something solid, something chosen, not out of obligation, not from tradition, but from staying, and neither of them would ever walk away again.